17, short title, The Pillar, Pillar. Our goal today includes a brief look at the Passover night, along with the first or beginnings of the Exodus journey out of Egypt. And in the process, we'll begin to consider a mystery to be unraveled. Mystery is going to involve multiple personalities, multiple personality names, objects that seem to have a mind and an ability to act. A lot of good information in this mystery. It comes out in the mystery. It'll weave a big web, and when we're finished in two, 3 more lessons, you'll be able to decide for yourself what it tells you that you may not have, very likely tell you something you did not know prior to this time. Very few people have wrestled with this particular mystery, but we'll get her done. Let's begin with the Passover night, which is in Exodus 12, beginning in verse 29. We all know the story, but let me just read it. It happened at midnight. The Lord struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, which means living firstborn, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in prison. Status didn't gain you a thing. And all of the firstborn cattle. And Pharaoh got up in the night, along with all his servants, all of Egypt, and there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was no house in which there was not someone dead. That's hyperbole. It would be no house where there was a living firstborn that would be dead. Typical Semitic hyperbole. And he, that is Pharaoh, summoned Moses and Aaron in the night and said, Get up, get out from among my people, both you and your children. Go and serve the Lord as you have spoken. Also take your flocks and your herds, just as you have spoken, and leave. But bless me also, please. Okay, this is not a natural disaster. This is 100% God. He's doing it. Second point, the hyperbole. You had to have a living firstborn in order to experience the death of a firstborn. The death of Pharaoh's firstborn son would be a special case because he would have had special attributes, special advantages, special inheritance, and the firstborn of Pharaoh would have been the natural one to ascend to the throne and continue the dynasty. That's gone by the wayside. As God had predicted, Pharaoh would force the Hebrews out. Notice Pharaoh didn't say, hey, y'all may go. No, he said, get out. Pharaoh's order included everything Moses had bargained for. From the beginning, he could have given Moses everything he wanted in the beginning, and there would have been no plagues. But he didn't. So men, women, children, livestock, get them all out of here. And then there's a last phrase is a bit of irony. Here is the Egyptian god Pharaoh making a request for a blessing from the Hebrew God Yahweh. That tells me that Yahweh's victory is complete over Pharaoh, over the Israeli god, or the Egyptian gods, over anyone that wanted to retain mastery and control over the Hebrews. Well, back in, I got a question. It goes back to Exodus 9:20. Let me read it. We've been through it before, but let me read it now. Those of Pharaoh's servants who feared the word of the Lord hurried to bring their servants and livestock into the houses. This was the plague of hail. And God said, even the Egyptians, if you get your livestock and your servants out of the field into shelter, they'll be fine. And some of them believed that. At least they feared it enough that they responded. Wouldn't you think that if they had heard about the blood on the lentils, meaning there'd be a Passover and no firstborn would die in the house, don't you think they would do that? I don't know. There's no indication that any of them did. And also, suppose you were an Egyptian neighbor of a guy who put blood over his lentil. Wouldn't you be a little suspicious of him? Well, in the first place, we don't know whether the word was spread to any Egyptians or not. This is one of those mysteries. And maybe someday in eternity future we'll get an answer. Well, after a bit of hurried preparation and instruction from Yahweh, the Israelites took off from Goshen, which remember is in the northeast of Egypt in the Delta Nile. Instead of going up along the coast, the short route to Canaan, God sent them south toward the Arabian Peninsula and Sinai. So let's pick that up in verse 20 of chapter 13. So they, the Israelites, journeyed from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the desert. Now the Lord was going before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them in the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could go by day or night. They didn't want to travel any time that God wanted them to travel. He did not take away from before the people the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night. Now this means that pillar stayed in front, leading the way. It was not a skinny little tower of some kind. We'll talk about that in a bit. But so far we have two terms that I'd like you to remember. Write them down if you got pencil or pen and paper. The first one is the Lord, Yahweh. The second is the pillar. Now it says that Yahweh was in the pillar. Okay? At least at this particular time. That single pillar, and it was a pillar of fire, pillar of cloud, but it was a single pillar that shifted between day and night. Had two purposes. One was to guide God's people along God's path to the promised land. Second was to provide shade from the heat or the heat of the day. We see that in Psalm 105:39. It says, God spread out a cloud for a cover and provided a fire to light up the night. So whatever this cloud or pillar was, it was broad enough to cover hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So it wasn't a skinny little tube of cloud going up and a skinny little piece of fire going up. This was widespread enough to cover a ton of people. So it made nighttime travel possible. It also, since Yahweh was in the pillar, it gave them his presence. So it represented his presence also. As it says, Yahweh was in the pillar. Got a question for you though. Which person of the Trinity was in the pillar? Or try this question out. Is the pillar a what or a who? Now I'm asking you questions that are going to end up being part of our mystery. So take them, note them, whatever you want to do. We'll see them from time to time. Does it seem to you that the pillar has a mind? How does it move? Why does it move? When does it move? Is it God moving it, or is a pillar moving on its own? And God's along for the ride, so to speak. Pharaoh wasn't finished, it turns out. We know the story. It's not a surprise to you. He changed his mind, said, I can't let this economic advantage the slaves give me, I can't let that go. So in verse 9 of chapter 14 says, and the Egyptians chased after them, the Israelites, and all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh and his horsemen and his army overtook them, the Israelites, camping by the sea. So here we are now. The Israelites are camped by the sea. On the other side of them, away from the sea, is Pharaoh's army, massive army. Well, this is the point at which the first griping sessions began. People would begin griping about Moses, figuring they were in a fix they couldn't get out of. And of course, they couldn't on their own. But then the pillar does something. Let's watch this. Not only this, we're going to introduce a third term besides Yahweh and the pillar. In verse 19 of chapter 14, we have the angel of God, and that would be in the Hebrew Malak, M-A-L'-A-K, Malak Elohim, Elohim being one of the personal names of God. So the Malak Elohim, who was going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them. And the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So the pillar of cloud looks like followed Malak Elohim. Either that, or what about this? Could Malak Elohim and the pillar be one and the same? Think about it. It came between, that's the pillar, came between the camp of the Egyptians and the camp of Israel. It's sort of a block. And remember, it was a huge thing. It was a dark cloud, but it lit up the night so that one camp did not come near the other the whole night. The supposition is that this dark cloud, which strangely, supernaturally, lit up the sky, probably lit up the sky over the Hebrews and put the darkness over the Israelites. In other words, light for God's people, darkness for Egyptians. God's been doing that all along, right? Discerning between Hebrew and Egyptian. But it's sort of a side note. Isn't that also a picture of the gospel? Don't I remember Paul saying something like, the gospel being light to those who believe and accept it, but foolishness or darkness to everybody else? Well, there's our third term, Malak Elohim. Let's check out verse 24 of Exodus 14. This is in the morning after they've crossed over the Red Sea. And in the morning watch, the Lord looked down on the host of Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud. And he threw the Egyptians into a panic. So there we still have, there's no indication that Malak Elohim left. Yahweh hasn't left, the pillar hasn't left, so we've still got them all there. Do you remember the burning bush? We had two personalities, or at least two names, said to be speaking from that bush. The angel of Yahweh, Malak Yahweh, and Yahweh himself, whichever person of the Trinity that was. Yeah. Again, is the angel of Yahweh and Yahweh two different people? Is the angel of Yahweh also Yahweh? Not spoken about here. Doesn't it seem that we've got the same situation here? Angel of God, pillar, God. And now we're going to jump over a whole series of things. Remember, the Hebrews have already griped at Moses. Now they're over on the other side of the sea, scot-free from the Egyptians. The Egyptians will never bother them. But first thing they do is what? We ain't got no water. So they start grumbling to Moses about the lack of water. Sounds a bit, remember, it was a situation where they had water, but it was bitter and they couldn't drink it. So somebody threw branch into the water, it became sweet, they could drink it. Supernatural provision for water. Makes you remember a bit about the wormwood in the water in the second Exodus that we read about in Revelation. Very similar sort of situation. Well, as soon as they got water, the next thing they bellyached about was a lack of food. God hasn't provided us with any food, so God provided a spiritual provision, manna and quail. Miraculous provision. That's in chapter 16. They were grumbling to Moses about that. The minute they got well fed with manna and quail, they started griping about a lack of water again. So what happened? The staff struck the rock, which incidentally could have been the face of a cliff, not some 400-pound rock, but it was a huge piece of stone in the first part of chapter 17, and they got water. And interestingly, the Jews had a tradition that said that rock from which the water came followed them throughout their entire wanderings. Strange sounding? Well, Paul evidently didn't think so. In 1 Corinthians 10, beginning in the first verse, Paul said this to the Corinthians, and particularly the Jews among the Corinthians. For I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that wouldn't necessarily be Jews, just Christians, that our fathers were all under the cloud. His fathers, anyhow, the Jewish or the Hebrew fathers, were all under the cloud. They were. They all passed through the sea. They did. And all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. In other words, when they followed the cloud, when they went on dry land through the sea, they were identifying with Moses and the program that Yahweh had set up for Moses to lead and guide. And it didn't stop there. And all ate the same spiritual food, supernaturally delivered manna and quail. And all drank the same spiritual drink. The water was supernaturally provided. Now catch this last portion. For they were all drinking from the spiritual rock. Remember, that's where the last streams of water came from. That followed them, and that rock was Christ. Paul says that was Christ leading and providing for them in their journeys. So add Christ to your list of names we want to wrestle with. Well, there were also victorious battles over the Amalekites in, chapter 16, in that's the last part of chapter 17, I guess. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, visited, said, "You're killing yourself. You got to get out of here and delegate." That was in chapter 18. Then in 19 through 23, we have the Israelites at Sinai and the beginning of constructing the law. Hasn't been finished, but they are beginning the construction of the law and the covenant and so forth. So, add Christ to your list. And let's look at their preparations, beginning in verse 20 of Exodus 23. This is before the tabernacle has been built. It's been talked about, but it hasn't been built. Excuse me. God speaking, I'm going to send an angel. Here's another expression. An angel. What angel? Doesn't say. An angel before you to protect you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Apparently, same task that was given to the Malach Elohim and the pillar. This angel has that same responsibility. Verse 21, take heed because of him, that is the angel, and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him. That's strange, isn't it? Why would you rebel against an angel? And what could the angel do about it if you did? Well, God tells us, for he will not pardon your transgressions. He won't forgive my sins if I rebel against him. Does that mean that he could forgive my sins if I don't rebel? That's interesting, because only God can forgive sins. And God goes on, for my name is in him. God doesn't put his name just anywhere, which represents himself, his authority, his essence. He says, but if you diligently obey him and do all that I speak, then I will be an enemy to your enemies, and I will be an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel, there's a different term again. This time it's my angel. Is that the same as an angel? Is that the same as Malach Elohim? Doesn't say. My angel will go before you, bring you into the Amorites and all the rest of the ites, and I will cut them off. So this, my angel, is to do the same thing as an angel, the angel of God, and the pillar. Couple of things. To cut them off doesn't mean to annihilate every individual among the various Ite clans. What it simply says is none of the Ite nations will be a nation when God's through with them. But there may be individuals surviving from them. So again, this angel has, whatever my angel is, exact same responsibility, protect and guide. But this angel perhaps could pardon sins. And this angel has God's name in him. Well, now let's go beyond the construction of the tabernacle. Well, now let's go beyond the golden calf, but not yet the construction of the tabernacle. Says God talking to Moses. So now go, lead the people. Now Moses is the leader, not an angel, my angel, angel of God. I have spoken to you about. See, my angel, here we are again, will go before you, but on that day I visit, on that day, in the place I have spoken to you about, I will visit their sin on them. Moses had tried to talk God out of severely punishing the Israelites. And God said, no, you get them out of here. You take them where they're supposed to go. But when I'm ready, I'll deal with their sin. They will be disciplined. And skipping a couple of verses to the first verse of chapter 33, we were in 32, 34 just a minute ago. And the Lord said to Moses, go up from here, you and the people whom you brought up out of the land of Egypt, to the land I promised you with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is typical Semitic language again, repeating things over and over and over again to make an issue of it. I will give it to you, to your descendants. That's what he told Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I will send an angel before you, again, and I will drive out the Canaanite and all the ites, go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. Watch this. But I will not go up among you, for you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way. But note, Yahweh's personal presence would be removed. Whichever member of the Trinity that was, if it was only one, he's not going to be with them. But his presence is signaled to them through the angel that is leading and guiding. So that's one of the matters we want to examine as we continue our study. We want to get a handle on all these terms. And there are at least 7 other names and expressions that are going to rise up in the next couple of sessions. This is a very complex mystery, but it's one well worth studying and understanding, so that you know who your God is, you know who your Savior is, you know who the Holy Spirit is, and you know He did not contradict Himself. See you